Hey guys, Aaron Cybertron Zhang here, and today we're trying out yet another brand new piece of content on this channel. Today we're going to be analyzing a tournament set that took place a couple of weeks ago. This was a really large online grassroots tournament organized by a group called the Battle Frontier, and the Battle Frontier is actually co-founded by Joe UX9, a really prominent player and content creator from North America, as well as Rosemary, aka Necro, who you may recognize because she is one of my co-commentators on the official Pokemon streams. So I wanted to basically go over the finals of this tournament that they organized a couple of weeks ago. It had over 300 players in it, and it was basically just a fun Series 10 event. It was one of the first major Series 10 online tournaments that I've seen, and you should definitely check out Battle Frontier if you don't already. They're going to be organizing a lot more events in the upcoming weeks and months, and so I've linked their Twitter, Twitch, YouTube, and Discord all down in the description below, so please go check them out. And if you're, you want to scratch your itch for VGC, definitely, sign up for their future events. So yeah, long story short, what I want to do is basically analyze as much as possible and basically watch a final set with you guys. So what I'm going to do is give you insight on the plays that both players are making, what I would do personally in their positions, kind of what I really like what they're doing, what plays maybe can be improved on a little bit, and just give you, as much analysis as possible. This is really meant to be as educational as possible, but hopefully a little bit entertaining as well. And this is something new that I'm trying out on the channel, so I welcome any feedback that you have for me. I want to make this the best possible product for all of you, so if you have any suggestions, any feedback, let me know in the comment section below what you like, what you'd like to see improved on, what you think can be better. I welcome, anything that you guys have to offer. And if this is something you want to see more of on the channel, I'd really appreciate it if you could leave a like on this video. It does help me gauge interest in, brand new video content ideas. So yeah, leave a like on the video if it's something you want to see something more of in the future, and let's just dive right into things. So first of all, a quick summary of this tournament. Like I mentioned, it had over 300 players. It was closed team sheet at first, I think an open team sheet in Top Cut. And so yeah, this was a classic like Swiss plus single elimination tournament. And ultimately, I think there was some money on the line, but the main value of playing in something like this is just getting really good, experience with Series 10 and to, just play in a competitive setting before Series 10 rolls around in game. And so what I'm going to quickly do is take a look at our two finalists, go over their accomplishments, and then look at their teams. One thing to note is that this was a open team sheet tournament, like I mentioned, in Top Cut, and so I actually have the teams from both players as what they see. Basically, open team sheet means you don't get access to EV spreads or IVs, but you can see specifically all the moves, the items, and the abilities. And so we can take a look at both players' perspectives in terms of their teams, and then try to maybe formulate a game plan from either perspective. So our first finalist here is Victor. Victor was in the seniors division just a couple of years ago and got top 8 at the World Championships, as well as top 4 at an international championship in 2018. And he is running a classic Kyogre rain team: Tornadus, Kyogre, Alecki, Tsareena, the Incineroar, and Shedinja. So typically this team archetype revolves around setting up Tailwind with Tornadus, and then Kyogre just really sweeping with Water Spout, and then you also have some other really strong attackers. Alecki is really powerful as an attacker, especially on a rain team, and Tsareena is actually really strong as well. It hits for relatively good damage and has really good type coverage as well between all of its different attacks that it gets access to. So Tsareena is also really valuable in this format. You didn't see it too much in previous formats in Sword and Shield because Dynamax basically made it weaker. A lot of Pokemon had access to like max airstream, like Landorus T, Togekiss, Thundurus, for example, and so Tsareena was kind of a poor pick against a lot of those. But with Dynamax no longer existing, there aren't as many really strong flying type Pokemon, and so not only is it bulky, not only does it not get KO'd very easily now, it also is primarily valuable for its ability, Queenly Majesty, which allows you to prevent priority attacks from your opponent. And so this is especially valuable because you can use Tsareena as a switch-in into Tornadus, and for example, not a switch into Tornadus, what I should say is as a partner for Tornadus, right? And so Tornadus relies so heavily on setting up Tailwind, but it's really tough to like fit Protect on its moveset because there's so many good moves that it gets access to. So with Tsareena, what you can do is lead Tornadus, and if you fear a Fake Out from your opponent on turn 1, you can just switch in Tsareena, and that will block any potential Fake Outs, allowing you to just set up Tailwind immediately. This team is just really fast paced, meant to just overwhelm your opponent with offense. Games will typically end pretty quickly. And so the other thing that I really want to mention here is Shedinja. You might be wondering why in the world would anyone use Shedinja in VGC, especially in this format. And the reason is that Shedinja actually walls a lot of the common restricted Pokemon. You look at the top restricted Pokemon, yesterday we kind of analyzed some of the top teams, and You got Kyogre, you got Xerneas, you got Zacian. Turns out that none of those can actually hit Shedinja with their common move pools, and it's very rare for those Pokemon to tech in a move to beat Shedinja specifically. So it turns out Shedinja can actually be a really good late game win con against some of the most common restricted Pokemon, where you can actually knock out the restricted Pokemon's partners and then just leave Shedinja for this 1v1 against the restricted Pokemon in the end game. So Shedinja is really interesting, definitely has a niche in the metagame, and gets access to a wide range of support moves like Ally Switch and Will-O-Wisp, as well as some offensive attacks. So Victor was 12-1 going into the finals, which is really, really impressive. I mean, to drop only one best-of-3 set in 13, like that kind of consistency is really difficult in Pokemon. So yeah, obviously on a very, very hot streak here, and some great accomplishments to his name as well. So covering his opponent now, it's going to be a Davide, and Davide, one thing that makes this finals really interesting, he's also running a Tornadus, Kyogre, Tsareena Rain team. Tornadus Kyogre, I didn't even talk about too much, but it has just been a really good archetype, especially in VGC 2019 and then in Series 8 as well. And yeah, Kyogre is just so strong, right? Even Pokemon that resist water take so much damage from Water Spout. It's just so hard to, you know, safely stay in front of a rain-boosted Mystic Water Sea and Sense Water Spout at full power. And so Davide has 4 of the 6 same Pokemon. We already talked about the general core and the archetype a little bit, but he's got an Urshifu and a Ditto. And now he's actually running the Dark-type Urshifu with Focus Sash instead of the Water-type Urshifu. That actually helps, you know, a fair amount in this matchup against Shedinja. And then he's also running Ditto. Ditto is one of those other Pokemon that you don't see very frequently in non-restricted formats, but has a lot of value in a restricted format because you could potentially copy a restricted Pokemon, right? And that could just potentially give you 2 restricted Pokemon. Now, Ditto is not exactly very easy to use because, for example, one, it's not the most consistent lead Pokemon because you can never fully know what your opponent's going to lead, and so that induces a lot of variance, especially if they go with something unexpected, then you're just locked in with the Ditto immediately as a lead. So more often than not, you'll see it come in the back, but even then, you can't guarantee that you're going to copy your opponent's restricted Pokemon unless you switch the Pokemon that's directly across from the restricted Pokemon. However, at that point, often when you see Ditto, your opponents will anticipate Ditto coming in, and so they can capitalize off and just like double up into that slot. So these teams are pretty similar, but you know, the key differences are Aleki and the Shedinja on one team, and then Urshifu and the Ditto on the other, and then even the Pokemon sets here have some, you know, differences between them. So let's quickly look at what both players basically know about each other's teams from, you know, the open team sheet format. So, looking at the first team here, most of this is relatively standard. The Tornadus here notably does have the Life Orb, as well as, you know, like Hurricane. Hurricane makes sense, obviously, on the rain teams. You don't need Air Slash. It also has Icy Wind for another means of speed control, and then Taunt. Taunt can be really interesting in the Tornadus versus Tornadus Mirror, so that's something to watch out for here. Very classic Kyogre, no Origin Pulse, it's actually running Scald instead. Tsareena here with the Assault Vest, and it's running Grassy Glide actually, as well as Power Whip. Sometimes you'll see like triple Axe over Glide, but generally this is a pretty standard set. Shedinja here, this is a really interesting one. It has Ally Switch, Will-O-Wisp, Shadow Sneak, and Protect, so doesn't have something like Shadow Claw or X-Scissor. So it's not really doing that much damage, but it doesn't need to, right? The whole idea is that in endgames, you will just win through the combination of like Will-O-Wisp and Shadow Sneak into restricted Pokemon that can't hit you at all. Even if it doesn't do that much damage, the Will-O-Wisp chip basically adds up long-term over against something like a Kyogre, right? And so Shedinja is really, really interesting in this format. Classic Shuckle Berry Incineroar here, and then Choice Specs Regieleki, which is really cool. You don't see Specs Aleki that frequently generally in VGC, but it makes a lot of sense in this team specifically because you can get Thunder, you know, 100% accurate Thunders in the rain. So Thunder won't miss. You got the Choice Specs to further increase your damage output, and most players are used to, you know, like Thunderbolt from Magnet Aleki. Now just imagine Thunder from Choice Specs Aleki. That damage output is significantly higher. So no major surprises here other than the Shedinja set, and Tornadus having Life Orb also means that its damage output is going to be greatly increased. Looking at the opposing team, this Tornadus, a little bit bulkier, still running the same moveset as the Tornadus here, but obviously it has the Wakandberry, so that makes things a little bit interesting. You can't necessarily one-shot it with something like Electro Web, which, you know, Tornadus lets a little bit more offensive, maybe just feints to, but it does have the same moveset here. We don't have the EV spreads here for either teams, but, you know, I think that most of the times Tornadus are going to want to be max speed. You don't want to be slower than opposing Tornaduses because then you'll just always lose the Taunt War, and that's really bad. Classic Focus Sash Urshifu here, classic Citrus Incineroar here, AB Tsareena here. There is triple Axle on this one. So with so many, of the same Pokemon, one thing that's always important in this matchup is like how are the Pokemon EV trained. Like I said, I think Tornaduses are typically going to be max speed, so that's probably a speed tie, but wouldn't be surprised if the Tsareena and the Kyogres don't actually speed tie. Some Kyogres run timid, some run modest, some actually prefer bulk, and then with Tsareena, you do typically invest a lot in bulk because of the assault vest, and players might invest in speed just to outspeed opposing Tsareenas. So yeah, pretty classic Tsareena stuff here, classic Kyogre here. What's interesting is that both players here actually opt for Scald rather than something like an Origin Pulse, so obviously you can't hit both Pokemon, but this is a more reliable option in the long term because Origin Pulse can miss very frequently and it's not a move you really want to rely on, so both of these Kyogres are, using 100% accurate attacks. And then finally you have the Ditto here, and the Ditto is Choice Scarf. So this can actually be a big deal in the mirror match, right? Because it's like if you both match Tailwinds, then Ditto potentially can come out, copy something, and then actually just outspeed everything. So the key differences I'm looking at here are the Ditto and the Urshifu and then the Alecki plus the Shedinja, and I think all of these Pokemon have a lot of room to operate with in this matchup. So let's get started. Take a look at team preview for the first game, and I'll walk you through how I would approach team preview for both players. Alright, so as we get into team preview for game 1, now what are the things that both players should be considering? The first thing is, in a matchup that's so similar here, you always want to ask yourself, how can I move first before my opponent? It's going to be pretty difficult to do so in a matchup like this because both players have Tornadus, but what that indicates to me is that Tornadus is a very crucial member for both players. If you don't bring Tornadus and your opponent does, they're likely going to set up Tailwind, you're not going to set up Tailwind, and they will probably just outspeed you and overwhelm you with offense. Tornadus is actually also really important offensively for both players here, right? Tornadus here hits the Tsareena and the Urshifu for super effective damage. Tornadus on the other side here hits the Shedinja and Tsareena for super effective damage. And I think it's really difficult to actually not lead Tornadus in this matchup. Tornadus is typically a more common lead Pokemon anyway. You don't see it in the back that frequently, but especially in a matchup like this where if your opponent puts on pressure immediately before you do, you will maybe just lose the game on the first turn. So I expect both players to lead Tornadus here, and I think it makes a lot of sense. Now, the other thing is basically how can you gain a speed advantage relative to your opponent, assuming both of you set up Tailwind, or can you deny them from Tailwinding? Now, Incineroar is probably the best way to deny Tailwind, where you can click Fake Out turn 1 and then Fake Out Taunt or Fake Out Tailwind, but the reason I don't love Incineroar here, or the reasons, are because one, Tsareena is on both teams and it's a likely bring for both players, so you can just switch in Tsareena as Incineroar tries to Fake Out. That's really bad, and then it just bypasses the Fake Out. It's already not a good start. Second of all, the restricted Pokemon on both teams is Kyogre, right? Kyogre just completely dunks on Incineroar, so I personally don't like Incineroar, at least in the game 1 situation, because it does not feel like the most consistent option. You could bring Incineroar theoretically as a lead, I think, in games 2 or 3 if you're really hard calling your opponent on a specific lead, but you'd have to be very confident on it. So I personally, in this position, would not bring Incineroar in game 1 from either player's perspective. So then the question is, how do we gain that speed advantage? The main things I'm looking at here are actually going to be the Regieleki from this side and Ditto from the opposing side. Ditto because that's the Choice Scarf, and Regieleki because it just outspeeds everything else on this team other than the Scarf Ditto. So here, for example, it's like, okay, well, if both players set up Tailwind, this Regieleki will still outspeed everything and can one-shot the Kyogre and can do massive amounts of damage into Urshifu. I mean, it would one-shot Urshifu if it didn't have Sash, one-shot the Tornadus as well. And so I think Regieleki is a really critical Pokemon that should come out. And Ditto is a tough choice here, right? Like, you don't want to lead it, but you could potentially bring it in the back. But if you bring it in the back, it means you're dropping something else. And one thing to really note here is that Shedinja is going to be a tough Pokemon to beat, right? You always have to play with the perspective of, okay, how do I, I have to think about Shedinja being the last Pokemon and making sure I actually have answers into it. So those answers are really going to come from Tornadus and Urshifu. If you're not bringing Incineroar, Tsareena doesn't have a way to hit the Shedinja. Ditto can come out, but with Choice Scarf, like in the Shedinja versus Shedinja war, you'll just bring them down to Sash, whereas they'll KO you. That being said, Ditto's still an okay bring, but if you're thinking about how to beat Shedinja, it's really the Tornadus and the Urshifu that's the most consistent. So that's why I think both of these Pokemon should probably come out all the time, because otherwise you will kind of just hard lose to Shedinja. And so this is the interesting about Shedinja. Even if you don't bring it here, it like creates the mind games for your opponent, right? So I think Tornadus, Alecki, I mean, Tornadus and Kyogre are must brings for both players, so that's a no-brainer. And then I'm looking at Alecki here and Tsareena here. And as for leads, you could go Tornadus Kyogre, Tornadus Tsareena, Tornadus Alecki. I personally like Tornadus Alecki the most, I think, out of the options, just because you get to outspeed everything. And it really covers for something like Tornadus Urshifu or Tornadus Kyogre on the opposing side. So, but that being said, I think from the opposing side, like, yeah, Torn with Urshifu, Tsareena, and Kyogre are all viable lead options here. So it really depends on like what you feel comfortable with here. But I think from this perspective, I would probably go Torn Alecki. From this perspective, I'd be really nervous about the Alecki lead, so something like Torn Tsareena or Torn Urshifu. But like I said, I think it's very conceivable both players lead with Tornadus and then one of the strong attackers, especially in the game 1 scenario where you're kind of just like testing the waters and seeing kind of what your opponent wants to go for. So plenty of room to work with. The key thing in game 1 is whether or not you actually want to bring out the Ditto and Shedinja. These Pokemon are a little bit tougher to execute, right? It's like safer to just go with your 4 offensive ones like Tornadus, Urshifu, Tsareena, Kyogre. And so we'll see if either player opts to actually bring it, because I think these Pokemon are really good in the matchup, but it's a lot harder to use. And when you don't have full information of your opponent's team, like EV spreads and whatnot, they might not be the most consistent Pokemon. So let's finally get started and actually talk about the game. I know that was a pretty long kind of team preview phase. So yeah, let's see. Looks like here it's going to be Tornadus plus the Tsareena lead, okay, with Kyogre and Alecki. Tornadus Tsareena makes sense. Tsareena is generally pretty bulky and can take attacks from most things other than the opposing Tornadus, and because the opposing Tornadus is in Life Orb and the Tsareena is Assault Vest here, you're probably not one-shotting the Tsareena with Hurricane, so I think that actually makes a lot of sense. So from the opposing side, yeah, I think it's just so hard to play this matchup for either player if you don't lead Tornadus, and if you're not leading it, then you're probably doing some hard call out with Incineroar, and that's pretty difficult to execute, especially in a game 1. So I definitely don't expect to see that at least happen in game 1. But the thing that's so interesting in best of 3 in VGC is team preview becomes a completely different game, and the leads become a completely different game going into the subsequent turns. It's subsequent games once you gain information. So it's actually going to be Tornadus and Kyogre. Okay. This is really interesting, right? Kyogre is going to outspeed the Tsareena here. It's going to set up the rain. Both Tornaduses have taunt. They're probably both max speed. So you could, try to gamble and taunt the opposing Tornadus immediately, or you could, just click Tailwind immediately. In this position, it's pretty interesting. Like, Davide here could go for the taunt, but if you lose the speed tie and Victor's Tornadus Tailwinds and Tsareena just outspeeds Kyogre and one-shots it, that's a really big issue, right? So in this position, you might be willing to just play safe here and just trade Tailwinds because you know your Kyogre is faster than Tsareena. Now, Kyogre in this position can opt for a Protect, so then the question is really, where do you go from there, right? Tsareena, I think, actually has the advantage in this lead matchup here because you can potentially just one-shot the Kyogre. Now, Tsareena here can get fancy and target the Tornadus, but without a triple axle, at best, you're really going for a U-turn. So it is just going to be a Tailwind here. And yeah, like the main thing here is you could also Hurricane into the Tsareena, but I'm not sure at one-shot. You really don't want the opposing Tornadus to Tailwind and just Power Whip you before you get an attack off. So Kyogre's not going to switch out. It's not going to Protect. It's actually just going to Water Spout, and that's pretty good damage on the Tsareena, but not enough for a KO. Not even close, right? It doesn't do even 50%. Okay, so we're going to see Tsareena go for the Power Whip. It is going to connect with the Kyogre, and that damage is so good. It actually gets the one-hit KO. So I wonder if Kyogre can actually be EV to survive that, but either way, that's a really strong start for Victor here, right? He just picks up a KO on the restricted Pokemon, whereas Davide, lost this restricted Mon. So Victor's going to bring in the Regieleki as Davide brings in the Tsareena. And one thing that's pretty interesting here is that Victor obviously could have brought out that Kyogre, but I actually like the decision not to, because one, you risk running into the opposing Tsareena or a Ditto coming in. If Ditto comes in and copies your Kyogre, that might make things a little bit awkward, because then the Ditto can just launch a Water Spout, and then the Tornadus can just launch a Hurricane into this slot, so the Tsareena faints. If you switch the Tsareena to Kyogre, into Alecki, the Alecki just faints, so it basically feels like if you're expecting Ditto, you're forced to give up the Tsareena here, and Kyogre takes a fair amount of damage as well. So in this position, Alecki is out. We know that both Tsareenas are Assault Vest. This Tsareena has Triple Axle, whereas both Tsareenas have U-turn. So Alecki here can Electro Web, but it's not going to knock out Tornadus because of Wakandberry, and we know Tornadus doesn't have Protect here, and there aren't any Electric Resist or Immunes in the back here for Davide. Unless there's a Ditto, you could switch that out into Ditto and copy it, but you still take so much from a Thunder, to be honest. So from Victor's perspective, it makes a lot of sense to just go for like Thunder onto Tornadus and then something like a U-turn. You can maybe double up onto this slot if you're scared of the Tornadus potentially switching out into Ditto, copying the Tsareena. But U-turn into Tsareena is also relatively safe. And the question is whether or not, if you go for Thunder, whether or not it'll KO through the Wakandberry. And then from Davide's perspective, I think with Tornadus, you probably just go for the Hurricane, and then this Tsareena can launch an attack into the Regieleki, which doesn't have Protect. Victor at this point, hasn't revealed his fourth one, but you would expect it to be Kyogre, so Power Whip into the Alecki slot is very, very safe, especially because, Alecki can't Protect. So the lack of Protect here really allows, Davide to make more informed attacks. Actually, none of the Pokemon on the field right now have Protect, which is what makes this such a fast-paced, like, offensive set, which is really, really interesting in my opinion. Okay, so that looks like I think a Thunder and a U-turn. So we're gonna see the Thunder come out. I would assume this knocks out Tornadus even with Wakamberry. Like, this is Choice Specs Transistor Regieleki we're talking about. And that is enough for the KO, okay. Yeah, I don't think you can really switch out the Tornadus there, though. And Tornadus typically has done its job after setting up Tailwind. It's just that now knocking out Tsareena might be a little bit difficult. So it is going to be a Power Whip coming out from Regieleki, or sorry, from Tsareena into Regieleki. That's, you know, a big one-hit KO, and the Tsarenas from both teams have really been the MVP thus far, as we see a U-turn come out and dish pretty good damage into Tsareena. So Victor's last one's obviously going to be Kyogre here. From Davide's perspective, I'm really curious, is it going to be Urshifu or Ditto? I think Urshifu makes more sense because you have to be scared of the Shedinja. So let's see. If it's Ditto, you would copy the Kyogre and you'd be choice locked. And that would be pretty interesting. You could then probably just go Water Spout and then like Triple Axle. Actually, yeah, if it were Ditto, it'd be really interesting because it's like if you lock yourself in a Water Spout, you're choice Scarf, but then the opposing Kyogre can like whittle down at you. So Tsareena comes in for Victor, and it's actually Urshifu for Davide, which, yeah, makes a lot of sense. I think in game one, you really are scared of Shedinja, so that, I think, is a good decision. So this turn is really interesting. The first question I have is, does Urshifu one-shot Tsareena with Wicked Blow? I think it's probably a damage roll, so we can do the damage calc after this, game, but it's pretty close. If I were Victor, would be very scared of Wicked Blow KOing. So if I'm Victor, I'm actually just assuming Wicked Blow is going to KO at this point. So then I'm thinking, okay, how can I win the game? I know the Urshifu is Focus Sash, and I know Tsareena can potentially one-shot me with Power Whip. So I think Tsareena is the bigger threat right now. Victor's Kyogre also has Scald, so the worst case basically is, well, the worst case is Tsareena surviving like an Ice Beam, but I think you would want to Ice Beam into Tsareena, pick up the knockout onto that because you know you're faster than it. The worst case is Urshifu KOs your Tsareena, and then it's a 1v1. You still have a 30% chance to win with Scald Burn. And if Urshifu does not knock out the Tsareena, you'll actually just win the game. So from Victor's perspective, I like Ice Beam into Tsareena, and I like Tsareena maybe going for, you could U-turn into the opposing Tsareena for 100% accurate attack, and if the Ice Beam doesn't pick up a KO, I don't know the speed interaction between these Tsareenas fully. I don't know if it's a potential speed tie or whether or not Davide's Tsareena is just faster because it did Power Whip first. But because Davide's Tsareena moved first, you should assume it's faster than yours, unless you're 100% confident it's a speed tie. So for that reason, I like the idea of Kyogre knocking this out because, Urshifu's Focus Sash. Now you can double up into that slot, so with the U-turn, it's like, okay, even if it's a speed tie and you don't KO, well, if you win the speed tie, then you'll KO the Tsareena. But one thing that's really critical here is that, yeah, like, can Urshifu one-shot the Tsareena? And I think from Davide's perspective, you should just Wicked Blow into Tsareena and then just go for the Power Whip into Kyogre. Yeah, you need, like, Urshifu will win the game more often than not in a 1v1, but you need to force that 1v1 right now. So, let's see. Oh, it's actually Water Spout, it's not Ice Beam. Okay. That could be very scary. I'm not sure that KOs Tsareena, given how much we saw. And Tsareena actually hangs on with 5 HP. Oh, okay, that really feels like a roll then. But Water Spout does not knock out the opposing Tsareena. That is so close, but I think Ice Beam would have done just a little bit more. Okay, and Urshifu hangs on, but the Tsareena gets the Power Whip off. No Tsareena have missed Power Whips yet. If you miss the Power Whip there, the game's doomed, and you just win the game if you're Victor. But fortunately for Davide, he's connected on all the Power Whips. And U-turn's going to come out here, but Davide is going to close out the game with 1 HP on Urshifu. There's no priority on Victor Tsareena here, so that's a wild first game. And it really came down to that turn specifically, right? It felt like Victor could have won if Ice Beam went into Tsareena, and it's also a potential damage roll in the Tsareena. So it really boiled down to this one big turn. Victor going for the Water Spout, just trying to maximize damage output, and maybe thinking it would be enough to KO the Tsareena, and maybe being concerned that Ice Beam wasn't going to do enough anyway by itself. But we're actually going to see Davide take game 1, which I have to say I would not have bet on after turn 1 of this game because, yeah, the restricted went down on turn 1, whereas Victor still had his restricted Pokemon, but it was a 1 HP margin there at the very end. And yeah, that was a really fun run, right? We did see different Pokemon come out already, and the Regieleki on one side, the Urshifu on the other, and I think either player could have very easily won that, especially on that one turn. So let's actually do some damage calcs real quick and talk about this final turn, because yeah, I think Wicked Blow is probably a roll on Tsareena, and then Ice Beam might potentially knock out the opposing Tsareena from this range. So let's pull up the calc. Okay, so if you're looking at Wicked Blow into Tsareena on a crit, it does 103 to 123. This is assuming Jolly Urshifu and max HP for defense Tsareena. We don't know the EV spread, so I'm not 100% sure about this, but these are pretty common spreads. So if you look at the HP range that Tsareena was at the start of the turn, let's see, what was it at? Yeah, it was at 113. So 113 is actually exactly a 50-50% chance of one-shotting there, assuming these are the spreads, which is really wild, right? So Tsareena had the chance of hanging on there, and it managed to get it. So now the other question is Kyogre into the opposing Tsareena. So Kyogre, and so we're looking at, let's see, Water Incense, or not Water, Sea Incense, Water Spout, and Ice Beam. In the rain, this is not Assault Vest right now, but you can already see that Ice Beam does around 8% more, just under 8% more. That Ice Beam does just more than 8% than Water Spout, right? And if you look at what the Tsareena hung on with in the end, it looked like it was just at like 5-10%, so somewhere in that range, right? So I think if you Ice Beam there, you do pick up the knockout because you get that little bit of extra damage, and that would have picked up the, like, maybe it's not a guaranteed KO. I'm also currently assuming this is timid Kyogre, or yeah, like if it's modest, that goes up to 48%. That feels like a near guaranteed KO, although it was just over 50%. So the Ice Beam is also a damage roll in that position, assuming this is the spread on Tsareena. So this turn was super close, right? Tsareena could have hung on, the Tsareena on this side could have hung on, but I don't think Water Spout will ever do it for you there, unless you're relying on outspeeding the opposing Tsareena, but the opposing Tsareena has already revealed that it attacked first previously, so at best it's a 50% gamble there. So yeah, I think the Ice Beam play that I mentioned earlier, I think I'd like to see, but one thing to note is that there's so much pressure going on during the game, right? It's very easy to not play super optimally. It's a lot easier to look at a game and review it than actually be in that position. That's one thing I really want to stress about something like this. There are two things that I should have actually opened with, but one, I don't have full information of what the players know about each other. Obviously, they have access to each other's team sheets, but they might even have additional information like how Pokemon are trained based off, you know, other games that maybe they played against previously, or maybe they had a friend that played against said player. So that's the first thing. I can't fully go into their head, so I'm doing my best to analyze it from my perspective, but there's very likely many things that I may miss that I may not have considered because I don't know what they know. Second of all, it's very easy to make mistakes in Pokemon and not play perfectly. Like, if you have especially ever been in a championship, like, clinching game, the pressure is unbelievable. Even for something like this is just kind of a more casual tournament, right? But there's still money on the line, and just winning a major, you know, couple 100-person event is a very big deal. And so it's very easy to let players miss the most optimal play, or they overthink things, or they just like underestimated a damage calc, because you only have 45 seconds to make your move. And so yeah, like it's very hard to play perfectly. Very rarely will I see a VGC set where I can honestly say both players played perfectly. And so yeah, like you have to keep that in mind. The kind of mental stress of a tournament is very, very real, whether it be fatigue from playing all day, stress or pressure, or, you know, nerves from playing in the finals, or just sometimes, you know, you get into your own head, or sometimes your opponents get into your head. I'm not saying that's the case for this specifically, but those are all just factors to consider. So I know it's very easy to like backseat game in Pokemon, and I want to make sure I'm not trying to do that. I'm just looking at it from my perspective, but I've had so many like finals that I played in where I look back and I'm like, that was definitely not the best play. And you know, I can say that for almost all the major like tournament sets that I have played in. And so yeah, either way, this was a really, really close game that kind of boiled down to this one really crucial turn. So let's look at team preview for game 2 and talk about how both players can potentially adjust. Okay, so now we're in game 2. If you are Victor, you're down 1 game, but you know that last game was really, really close. Now, to me, Victor actually had a pretty good lead advantage as well, but the main thing is that it felt like he didn't get enough out of the Regieleki. The Regieleki basically came out and was used to one-shot Tornadus, but Regieleki's also really good into the rest of the team here as well, right? And in the last game, we saw the Tornadus Kyogre lead here, so Eleki can obviously one-shot the Kyogre or the Tornadus. So I like to see Eleki play a bigger role. As I mentioned, I think Tornadus Eleki is a very solid lead option, you know, before we even got into game 1, so I think that makes a lot of sense. And then you can just have Tsareena and Kyogre in the back. You know, once again, they're like very new scenarios for Incineroar, but you'd have to be so confident to bring it into game 2, like, especially because, you know, we saw Tsareena on the opposing team come out in the last game. So it's like, are you really confident leading Incineroar if your opponent can just lead Tornadus Kyogre and potentially switch in Tsareena on turn 1? It's pretty scary. I think the best way maybe around that is Incineroar plus Regieleki, but I don't know. It's just a really, really tough lead. So I think like you could go with Tornadus Tsareena again. You could go with Tornadus Kyogre or Tornadus Aleki. Personally, I'd like to see Aleki have a bigger impact on the game in general. And Shedinja can come out here, but you know, if you are from this perspective, do you really want Shedinja? You just saw the Urshifu late game in the previous game, right? So maybe you don't feel super comfortable bringing Shedinja because you know that your opponent's willing to bring that Urshifu in the back. So I think the safer bet is to just go Torn Kyogre, Tsareena Aleki, with Torn Tsareena or Torn Aleki as the lead. And then from the opposing side, you know, Tornadus Kyogre worked, but you did have to run into the Tsareena early on. And yeah, the Tsareena just one-shot the Kyogre. So if you're looking to counter the Tsareena specifically, maybe you're willing to actually just take that trade once again, but that game did feel way too close. And I'm not sure it's worth to trade your, like, you know, restricted Pokemon immediately. So then it goes back to the same leads I was talking about earlier. Like, you don't want to lead Ditto, so it's Torn Urshifu, Torn Tsareena, or Torn Kyogre. But sometimes when you're a game ahead and like you won the previous game, you're just willing to go with the same leads. And I'm not sure Torn Urshifu or Torn Tsareena are actually substantially better in beating the opposing Torn Tsareena lead. So yeah, like Torn Kyogre, one play you could maybe make differently is protect the Kyogre and just go for Hurricane, although I don't think Hurricane one-shots because of the AV and the lack of a Life Orb here. So the Torn Tsareena lead was honestly pretty well done in the first game here, and so we'll see what adjustments both players make going into this second match. So let's just skip ahead and see. Okay, so it's just going to be Tornadus Kyogre again in game 2, and then Tornadus Aleki this time around. Okay, so I like the Aleki adjustment. But I have to be honest, I think this is actually still really scary. And this is actually very dependent on turn 1, and I'll tell you why. So in this position, just get a better shot here. In this position, the Regieleki can one-shot either Pokemon. Now, I don't think Specs Electro Web actually one-shots either. It does a lot, but it's not going to pick up the KO. And the main thing here is if you read into Kyogre protecting, and Kyogre protects and Tornadus goes for like a taunt onto your Tornadus, and then the Tailwinds in the subsequent turn, you might just lose the game, which is really scary. But also, if you read into Kyogre protecting, you target the Tornadus, and then the Kyogre just Water Spouts, that's also really, really bad. So this is a really scary turn because it feels like Victor needs to call it correctly. If he doesn't, he will actually very likely lose this game. So it's a very big decision on what the Regieleki does in turn 1. Now, you could maybe go for Electro Web, but the scary thing about Electro Webbing is then maybe the Kyogre survives. If you, for example, if you protect and taunt, Electro Web doesn't KO Tornadus, then you just Tailwind Water Spout. So I think in this turn, Aleki needs to make the right call on who to target between these two. And if you're Davide, you might be like, hey, I have a game lead. I'm willing to just play risky and give up the Kyogre turn 1 on a Water Spout. Like, yeah, you would lose the game on a Thunder if the Thunder actually goes into it, but you'd also just maybe win. It's really difficult to come back if you have that 4-2 lead immediately. So let's see. So looks like Victor's opting for the Tailwind, and Kyogre is going to protect it. We saw Regieleki launch the Thunder into Tornadus, so Victor does get it correctly off. And notably also gets the taunt off into the opposing Tornadus before it can attack. But I can't stress how critical it is that Regieleki made the Tornadus target here, because if Davide's Kyogre just goes for Water Spout, the game's just over, it feels like. Especially because Victor did not get that Tailwind off. Now, at the same time, Davide's play is also a potentially game-winning play, and I'll tell you why. Had Thunder went into Kyogre, because Tornadus did manage to get the taunt off onto Victor's Tornadus, if Victor didn't make that correct target, then Davide can indeed click Tailwind with Tornadus the subsequent turn, and then Kyogre just outspeeds everything and clicks Water Spout. So, honestly, based off the leads, it felt like the game was already decided after turn 1. It's just whoever calls turn 1 correctly. So Victor ends up being on the better side of it, and it's just so hard to come back from Davide's perspective now, especially because you already protected with Kyogre. So if I'm Victor here, I'm always going to launch the Thunder into Kyogre and say, okay, you know, if you don't go for the double protect, I just KO you. If you go for the double protect, that's actually probably the scariest option. I think the scariest thing, the thing you absolutely don't want to see if you're Victor, is Davide go for the double protect with Kyogre and then Urshifu just Wicked Blow into Aleki. And that actually might be Davide's best shot at winning at this point. You could also switch out the Kyogre, but I don't know. I don't think neither Tsareena or Ditto are really, really want to take that. And even if you make the switch out, you still like take so much damage, and then Victor still has Kyogre potentially in the back. So from this perspective, it feels like Victor's or Davide's best play is really to just go for that double and just hope that you get it. Or you can hope that Victor messes up and, gets too into his head about the double protect and actually doesn't launch Thunder into Kyogre and maybe doubles up onto Urshifu. I think that's also a viable play, but realistically, the ball's in Victor's court now, and he is so far ahead in this game after turn 1, right? He got taunted, but at this point, you don't even need Tailwind of your Victor because you have this Regieleki still out on the field. So typically when you have an early lead like this, the main thing you want to consider from Victor's perspective is let's not throw the game, let's not go for inaccurate attacks, and let's spread our damage and distribute our damage evenly, right? So even if the double protect comes out here, Tornadus can go for Icy Wind or Hurricane. I think I actually like Hurricane a little bit more just because you can miss Icy Wind, but Kyogre does not attempt the double, and Urshifu actually goes for the Sucker Punch. That's actually another win con I didn't think about, which is pretty smart. At this point, Davide is hoping for the critical hit, Sucker Punch onto Alecki, that picks up the KO. Kyogre would then knock out Tornadus, and then suddenly, if you get that crit, you actually have the numbers advantage. And because Victor didn't opt for Hurricane, yeah, Icy Wind hurts, but you didn't KO the Urshifu. So I think going for the Sucker Punch crit is definitely also a viable option there, but I think Double Protect might be a little bit better just because the odds of a Double Protect are substantially better than a crit. That being said, Davide, it's like really difficult for him to come back already at this point in the match, so I think that's totally an understandable play. And when you're so far behind, a lot of the times you just try to make hard reads, trying to make like big desperate plays, and you really need your opponent to play into it. So yeah. Ultimately, I think what this shows me is if I'm Davide, I'm thinking, wow, Tornadus Kyogre is a coin flip as a lead if I go into Tornadus Alecki. So I think Davide going into a game 3 probably does not want to lead that again because you can just lose the game on turn 1, basically like how this game played out. Tsareena comes out in the back here. I mean, this basically feels like a done deal, right? Tornadus can easily KO the Pokemon here. I'm curious if Life Orb Hurricane actually knocks out the Tsareena here, so let's see. Urshifu goes for the Detect. I like that. I think your best bet here is to hope that you survive Hurricane and then hope Triple Axle KOs the Tornadus. So Life Orb Hurricane's going to come out, and that is so strong. Wow, even with the Assault Vest, that still picks up the KO. I think Davide had some slight comeback potential there if the Hurricane misses the knockout, and then Triple Axle knocks out Tornadus. Then from Victor's side, you still have to deal with a potential Tsareena, Shedinja, and Kyogre. So I think it's still really difficult, to be honest. But I can definitely respect the Detect there from Davide's Urshifu. Also could have just gone for Sucker Punch. Wouldn't have mattered, though, right? Like, Victor's lead was just so large in this game. So we're going to see Thunder come out. And the Alecki adjustment was everything going into game 2, right? Like, it's really been about the lead so far. Putting on early pressure, and Regieleki did exactly that in game 2. So the score is tied even now at 1-1, and I am really interested in game 3 because I think, yeah, at this point both players have a fair amount of information. We've seen the Tsareenas interact against each other in terms of speed, but the main thing I'm curious here is, yeah, do you consider bringing the Ditto and the Shedinja, because both of those are pretty interesting options. So if I am from Davide's perspective and I'm expecting Tornadus Alecki again, I think you could go with your Tornadus plus your Urshifu or your Tornadus plus the Tsareena. I think I like either of those options a lot more than Tornadus Kyogre. I really don't think you can lead Kyogre again. You can if you want to gamble the game away on a coin flip 50-50 on turn 1, but I just don't think those odds are worth taking it. So I like the Tornadus lead, and then you consider one of Tsareena or Urshifu. And then from the opposing perspective, now here's what's interesting. Let's say you actually expect Tornadus plus Urshifu as the lead. This actually gives you more room to have Shedinja in the back, because then you're saying, okay, hey, maybe one of my win conditions should just knock out the 2 Pokemon that can actually beat my Shedinja early on, and then Shedinja can close out the end game. So it can certainly be a viable pick, especially going to game 3, particularly if you expect the Urshifu to come out earlier on in the match. That being said, I mean, I think Tornadus, Regieleki, Tsareena, Kyogre is, a very safe 4 to go with, but you have really interesting room to work with here with Shedinja. And Ditto has just been such a wild card here. It's so interesting because it's so hard to confidently lead that. So, I don't typically expect to see it as a lead, but maybe you bring it in the back. It's just a weird Pokemon to bring in the back as well, because, yeah, you don't have, guarantee necessarily on what you copy, and it's just such a variable Pokemon, so we'll see. I think if I were in Davide's perspective, I'd probably go just Tornadus Tsareena or Tornadus Urshifu here. Probably Tornadus Tsareena, to be honest, but I can understand why you might be hesitant on Tornadus Tsareena because you're worried about the opposing Tornadus Life Orb Hurricane just one-shotting you, and that's a really big damage calc, to be honest. The fact that AV Tsareena can't survive that, or maybe it can, maybe it's a damage roll, but the fact that we've seen it get that one-hit KO is really, really scary. So, yeah. So as we go into team preview here, it looks like considering Tornadus plus Aleki again. Yeah, I still don't I just don't like considering. Wow. Okay, Shedinja. Is it gonna make an appearance? It looks like it. Just heavily debating it. Dropping Tsareena here makes sense. You're like at this point probably very confident Incineroar's coming out. If you have that Regieleki, you're confident in a Kyogre answer, and even though Shedinja doesn't do much damage to Kyogre, you still win the 1v1 in that as well. So, Shedinja actually makes a lot of sense to me, especially in a Game 3 if you're expecting an Urshifu lead, particularly. So, we'll see if he actually locks in the Shedinja. Okay, and we're going to see Shedinja. So I'm really curious on the lead adjustment from the opposing side because Torn Kyogre was not it in Game 2. Game 2 feels really tough, right? Because it's like if you actually called it correctly, you would just win the game on turn 1. But it's really stressful for both players there. I don't think there was like a super safe play for either player to make in that perspective. And you don't typically want to play VGC like that where a game can just like, you know, be won or lost. And Ditto actually comes out. Whoa. Okay, I need to pause here for a second. Because initially I was thinking, you know, Ditto is like such a variable lead. But it's actually so smart in this particular case. And I'll tell you why. If you're specifically expecting Tornadus plus Regieleki from Victor's side, the Ditto bring is amazing. Because if you copy the Tornadus, then with the Choice Scarf, you will get the Prankster Taunt off before Tornadus can do anything. That actually denies the Tailwind, meaning that this Tornadus can then set up Tailwind, setting up its team for success. Even if you lose both Pokemon here, like obviously Regieleki looks amazing against these two Tornaduses right now, but even if you lose both Pokemon, if you get a free switch into Kyogre, Kyogre can just start clicking Water Spout, and assuming Urshifu's your last one, you can actually close out the game very easily with that duo. And if the Ditto now copies the Regieleki, well, you're Choice Scarfed. And so then I guess my question is whether or not like a Electro Web would be enough to knock out this Tornadus. This Tornadus doesn't look like it has any bulk, but you could make the play where you Tailwind. Maybe you don't Electro, maybe you just like Volt Switch instead. But the more I think about it, the more I love the Ditto pick, specifically if you're hard reading into the Tornadus plus Aleki lead from your opponent here. So I think this is actually super clever. And even if, you know, your opponent leads Tsareena or Kyogre, I think the Ditto still makes sense, because if it's Tsareena, then you can just Scarf U-turn out and pivot out. And if it's Kyogre, then you'll have a faster Water Spout immediately. So the more I think about it, the more I think the Ditto lead is actually so clever. And, you know, Ditto's a really hard Pokemon to lead because you don't necessarily know what your opponent's going to lead. But in this matchup, I think this is brilliant. And so from this position, I would just go taunt on turn 1 onto Tornadus and Tailwind with this Tornadus. One thing you have to be very careful about here, if you are Victor, is giving them a free switch in into Kyogre, right? If you knock out the Ditto and Kyogre comes in, that could be a really big issue. So we'll see how this first turn plays out, but I think Davide's decision to actually lead Ditto is not something I actually immediately thought of, but is so clever. It's a very tough play to make, but I love it. I absolutely love it here, even though it looks bad because of the Regieleki. And Victor's going for Electro Web. That can be really risky. So yeah, there's that Choice Scarf taunt going into Tornadus, denying speed control. That is just so smart. Because this is what is going to give you the speed control advantage in this matchup. Okay, so Tailwind comes out, Regieleki goes for Electro Web, and Ditto dodges it! Oh, that is actually such a big deal. But maybe not for who you think it's a big deal for. So let's pause the game real quick. If Victor hits that Electro Web, Ditto goes down, and Davide gets a free switching into Kyogre. It is so difficult for Victor to actually win the game from that perspective if you get that free switch into Kyogre. Because then Kyogre just clicks Water Spout, you've got the Tailwind up already, and the Regieleki very kindly enough dropped Tornadus' speed, so the Kyogre Water Spouts first, and then the Tornadus goes for Hurricane. Meaning that Victor can't even safely switch out, right? Like, neither of these Pokemon have Protect, so basically you either sack both of them, you sack one of them, or you switch into both Shedinja and Kyogre. At that point, then it's probably best to go for the double switch. But even then, her Water Spout plus Hurricane will either break the Shedinja Focus Sash and you get like, 30% of damage on a Kyogre, or Kyogre just takes like 70% immediately. And then is at risk of potentially fainting from another Water Spout. So that's actually a huge Electro Web dodge, and I think if I'm Davide, I'm actually really frustrated, and I wanted that to connect because I get the free switch into Kyogre. But because it doesn't connect, now Davide is in a really weird spot. Your Tornadus is locked into that Choice Scarf taunt. So at best, you can just go for another taunt onto Tornadus, which you maybe expect to switch out to. Or maybe a better option here is to potentially switch to Tornadus out. But if you are Davide, you might be worried about switching Tornadus in and then just taking too much damage with either the Kyogre or the Urshifu or the Tsareena. If you have Tsareena in the back, I think the Ditto switch then makes the most sense. But I liked Victor's decision here to switch out the Tsareena, or switch out the Tornadus into the into Shedinja. So, I mean, Davide here with Tornadus can, go for like a taunt and a Hurricane into that slot to cover for the switch out. So that's something to consider. I think Ditto here switching out makes a lot of sense to me. But yeah, you might be concerned about taking too much damage. So I could see the concern of not wanting to switch out. But that's why like the miss there is really frustrating turn one. Especially because Electro Web's coming out your way. So yeah, he just stays in, just goes for another taunt there. And it's just going to be another Electro Web. But, like, that's a double KO now, right? Like, the thing that's so important here is if this Tornadus faints, you get something that can cover the Aleki, allowing your Tornadus to hang around longer. And Tornadus is so critical in this matchup because it can Hurricane specifically into Shedinja. So that miss makes it so much harder to play the game if you're Davide. So that's a frustrating one. But if you're Davide right now, you can't tilt, right? You can definitely still win the game. So actually you can't if Tsarena's in the back. So we'll see if he brought the Urshifu. Because if it's Tsareena, this game's actually already over just because of Shedinja. And that's the pressure that Shedinja applies. But Davide does correctly bring in the Urshifu. Okay. So Davide's got a couple of turns of Tailwind to work with right now. Victor does not really have a free switch in. Your best option right now, if you want to conserve Aleki, would be to hard switch the Aleki out into Kyogre. The Shedinja here is taunted, so you can't go for anything other than Shadow Sneak at this point. You can switch out, but I really don't think Victor wants to switch out Shedinja because anything coming in would just take a Water Spout. So you basically just go for Shadow Sneak right now, and then the decision you make if you're Victor is, do you sacrifice Aleki, do you maybe conserve it but then switch something in? Tornadus is just going to get one shot by in. There's still too many turns of Tailwind to deal with, so that doesn't feel like the switch in. So basically to me the option is either stay in with Aleki or bring in Kyogre and take some chip damage with it. And I don't know what the absolute right decision is at this point, but I like the decision to Shadow Sneak into Urshifu. Another thing to consider from Victor's perspective right now is if you knock out Urshifu, you win the game with Shedinja, and you still have your Focus Sash intact with Shedinja. So Victor's got to be thinking, okay, is there any way I can actually knock out the Urshifu right now? So we're just going to see Shadow Sneak. I mean, the downside for the Shedinja set is that it doesn't do very much damage, but still notably breaks a Focus Sash, and that's important considering the Tornadus that's in the back. So Wicked Blow does go into the Shedinja slot. Makes sense. You can't ally switch right now, so that's just a super safe target if you're Davide. Okay. Shedinja's going to avoid, I think. Yeah, that's Water Spout. And so, yeah, Victor ends up not making the switch, but I think it makes sense. I don't know. You could pivot out into Kyogre there. Because Aleki is obviously really good against both of those Pokemon in the late game. So it depends on like whether or not you're confident in, just Kyogre taking as much damage as it, does. So I also like the decision to bring out Kyogre here over Tornadus. I think Tornadus just, falls way too easily. You just lose the game actually if you bring out Tornadus, I think. Given that there's still one more turn of Tailwind here and Tornadus can't protect, the opponent would just Water Spout and Wicked Blow, and Shedinja's taunted as well. So you absolutely have to bring out Kyogre there. So from this perspective, Victor has, still taunt on Shedinja. If you switch Shedinja out, it's very likely Tornadus just gets knocked out, and Shedinja's Focus Sash is already broken, so it's very risky to switch out here. So I think it makes more sense to just stay in. And then from Kyogre's perspective, you can just go for another Water Spout here. If you are a Davide right now, the key thing you have to worry about is your Urshifu fainting, because if Urshifu faints, once again, Shedinja will win the game. So Victor can actually consider a Shedinja switch out here if you want to go all in, hoping Urshifu doesn't protect, and then you just pick up a KO onto it with a Scald, for example. So Davide here has to make the decision of what to do with Urshifu. Do you conserve it or do you play safe? Something like Protect and Scald or Water Spout from Kyogre I think is probably the safest play, especially with Tailwind still being up. And so, yeah, but, at the same time, Victor here can just go for the win by switching out and scalding. So I think for Davide's end, it just makes more sense to go for the protect here. There's not that much downside. And another big question I have is the speed interaction between the Kyogres after Tailwind is over. Because we've only really seen Tailwind, these Kyogres interact now, with one having a obvious speed advantage over the other. So let's see. Okay, Urshifu does go for the detect, and Shedinja notably does not switch out, as it goes for a Shadow Sneak. It's actually pretty darn good damage, around 20%ish or so. And that actually makes a difference as well, right? If you don't Shadow Sneak there into the Kyogre, this Water Spout does more damage. So good damage there. You've broken the Focus Sash on Urshifu. And Scald goes out into Urshifu. Okay, so Taunt's wearing off. Tailwind's wearing off. This is where the action is this turn, I think. I guess it also depends on how the Kyogre speed interactions are. Because if you're confident you outspeed Davide's Kyogre, you just win the game by switching Shedinja out into Tornadus and scalding into Urshifu. But if you're worried about a speed tie or even being slower, that's really scary, right? Because then, if it is a speed tie or you are just slower, Wicked Blow plus Water Spout just knocks out Kyogre. So here, from Victor's perspective, you have to make the choice, informed decision. Are you nervous about the opposing Kyogre being faster? And at this point, Victor has more knowledge than I do because he knows his Kyogre spread, and he has a better game sense here. But from here, the key things are, I think, like, you can theoretically win the game on this turn if you're Victor by knocking out Urshifu, but Wicked Blow Water Spout's just going to KO this thing, and if the Kyogre gets outsped, you just lose the game. So this turn is so critical. So if you're worried about the Wicked Blow Water Spout getting outsped by the opposing Kyogre, your way around it is basically to go for Ally Switch here with Shedinja. I guess Kyogre could actually theoretically switch out into Tornadus, but then you just lose the Tornadus, right? And what is Shedinja going for? A Will-O-Wisp onto this? It's actually an interesting option, but the Will-O-Wisp doesn't matter. Like, this will still KO the Shedinja, so yeah. To me, there is actually maybe some potential in that play, but the main thing I'm thinking about here is you either switch Shedinja and Scald, or you Ally Switch and attack with Kyogre. Or, if you hard read it to them predicting the Ally Switch and target the Shedinja, I guess you could actually just not Ally Switch, go for another Shadow Sneak into Kyogre, and just Scald into Urshifu. So those are like the three main plays that I'm thinking of right now. One thing to note is that this is an open team sheet tournament. Both players know that there's Ally Switch on the Shedinja, so Davide knows that, but that actually adds more mind games to the mix than anything, right? So it all boils down to this turn, and to be honest, this is a very difficult turn to play out for either player because there's so many different things that either side can do. So Shedinja goes for the Ally Switch. Okay. Urshifu is going to go for the Wicked Blow here. And it targets the Shedinja. Doesn't go into Kyogre. Oh, okay. So now the question is, whose Kyogre moves first here? Okay, it is going to be Victor's Kyogre. So, yeah, like, if Victor was 100% confident on outspeeding there, you can make the Shedinja play, but you also don't have to worry about Urshifu going for a double protect there. But Shedinja switch Scald into Urshifu would have won the game there, and he survives with Water Spout with 23 HP. What a clutch survival. And I think at this point, if Victor's Kyogre is just faster, actually, even if it's slower, because Davide, you're just going to Hurricane into Kyogre, and Kyogre at that point, Water Spout won't knock out both Pokemon. So your best bet is, I guess, hope for... Actually, I would think here right now you would want to stall out the rain. I don't know how many turns of rain are left, actually. I haven't been keeping track of that exactly. But yeah, what you could do is try to stall out the rain so that Hurricane isn't 100% accurate. Or if you still think it's a potential speed tie between the Kyogres, you go for... Actually, even if it's a speed tie, Hurricane just does so much to Kyogre where then your best bet would be Scald, Protect, hope for speed tie, Scald into Kyogre, and then hope that Tornadus misses Hurricane later on. But at this point, it's not looking very good for Davide. And it was all, that last turn, the Ally Switch turn was absolutely critical. So, I'm really curious about the Kyogre spreads and whether or not they actually speed tie here. A lot of players do like running max speed, but a lot of players like running some bulk on Kyogre. Hurricane does so much damage, even gets the confusion as well. So, no protect from the Kyogre coming out in the end. And Victor's Kyogre is just faster again and gets the Scald off. And so Victor's going to take home the championship. and win the finals in an exhilarating 2-1 set. That was actually an amazing set of Pokemon in my opinion, and there were so many factors. Like, it could have played out so differently in all 3 games. Like, game 1 boiled down to this, like, in Pokemon often you can just point out like the key turn where it feels like one player has to call things correctly. And in this matchup specifically, because both teams are so fast-paced and so hyper-offensive, there's not much bulk or opportunity to switch. So this turn, Victor maybe could have won if he went for Ice Beam into Tsareena, especially because his Tsareena ended up surviving. I just don't think Water Spout there is it, unless you're confident it's going to KO Tsareena, but yeah, it's not. But once again, like, it's so easy to not play optimally, and it's also so much easier to analyze these games afterwards and point out these mistakes or potential like subpar plays when there's so many factors that you're thinking of while you're actually in the game. And I wouldn't even call that a mistake or a subpar play. But especially if you're not, like, if you don't know the damage calc super well here, right? Like, damage calcs are an important component of the game, and sometimes you're just not confident, or sometimes you just think one move is going to KO when it doesn't. So in game 1, this was really the turn that it boiled down to. In game 2, it was literally turn 1. Davide could have won game 2 on turn 1 immediately if Kyogre attacked with Water Spout, I think. But Victor made the correct play to Thunder into the Tornadus. And in game 3, there were a bunch of things. If that Electro Web does connect on Tornadus in the early game, I think Davide actually has, I would pin him as the favorite to win that game at that point, because you just spam Water Spout and Hurricane. Even without that, there's the ally switch turn, right? Although, okay, even if Davide had called it correctly, I don't think Wicked Blow was KOing Kyogre. And Scald knocks out Urshifu anyway, actually. So actually, this turn isn't as impactful as I thought. Yeah. Mainly because Victor's Kyogre is outspeeding Davide's Kyogre consistently. Maybe it's been a speed tie this whole time and Victor just got lucky with the speed ties. But actually, yeah, for that reason, then I love the ally switch play there because it covers every option. It's like, even if your opponent predicts you, if you knock out the Urshifu here, Shedinja just closes out the game against Kyogre. And if they don't predict you, then the game's just wrapped up. So the main thing I really have to wonder at the end of the day then is the speed interaction between the Kyogres here. And yeah, whether or not it was a speed tie or not, I can't say for sure. Either way though, congratulations to both Victor and to Davide for an amazing finals. Like, that was actually really, really good Pokemon. We saw great adjustments from both ends, you know, from Victor's perspective. You know, he changed up the lead matchup a bunch, went from Tornadus Tsareena to Tornadus Alecki to Tornadus Alecki with Shedinja in the back. And then from Davide's perspective, he went Tornadus Kyogre to Tornadus Kyogre to Tornadus Ditto. And it's a shame that the Ditto play didn't work out because I know as a lead matchup things look really rough here, and I wonder if, like, I don't know if Davide, I feel like his game plan probably was to copy one of Tornadus or the Alecki and then just go from there. And he actually ends up getting the better trade-off of copying the Tornadus. And I really do think if that Electro Web connects, it's not like a completely lost game for Victor yet, but it's really difficult. So, yeah. Anyway, that is going to be it for this analysis. I had a lot of fun, so I hope you found it entertaining. I hope you found it helpful. I love analyzing Pokemon and just looking over sets in VGC. And once again, I want to caveat this with my analysis might not be 100% correct. I don't know what the players knew about each other's teams, and so that often changes dramatically. Like, even if you know one Pokemon's EV spread and you know you outspeed it consistently, you know it's not a speed tie, that changes everything, especially in a mirror match like this. It's not a pure mirror match, but obviously a lot of the Pokemon are similar. And so, yeah, the analysis might not be 100% correct, but I hope that you at least found it valuable and, yeah, found that there was some value in just what I was saying in general. And overall, this is a new piece of content I'm trying on the channel, so let me know what you thought about it. Leave any comments or feedback down in the comment section below. Would really, really appreciate it if you could leave a like on the video if you did enjoy it and want to see more. Definitely, you know, would love to continue to do this if it's something that's well received on the channel. And huge shout outs once again to Battle Frontier for organizing it. Give them a follow, give Necra and Joe a follow, and our finalists, I'll link their Twitters down in the description below as well. So I had a lot of fun with this one, and I know I already said that. I think one last takeaway I'll leave you with is you can see how good restricted Pokemon can be, right? Kyogre often can just be the Pokemon that, you know, goes off as a cannon and just beats everything. But at the same time, a lot of this matchup was actually defined by the non-restricted Pokemon. Tornadus enabling, setting up Tailwind and taunting each other. The Tsareenas in game 1, you know, trading back and forth to KOs with Power Whip. in game 2 is just Regieleki immediately winning the game on turn 1, basically. And in game 3, both Shedinja and Ditto played really, really big factors for both players there. And so, you know, I think the one restricted format is actually really fun because you don't just rely on, you know, setting up your 2 restricted Pokemon and enabling them to win the game. Suddenly, all the other components of your team can be very viable offensive members as well. So, yeah. I've rambled on long enough, so seriously, from the bottom of my heart, thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you all soon. All right, peace.